Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome presenter, Newsday, BBC World KASUJJA.
And I hope you're having yourself a lovely day today. It's been a fantastic experience, and I've got to say thank you very much to Doha and to Qatar, our hosts, for what is an eye-opening experience indeed. And the conversations happening here are very fundamental, and I'm glad to be hosting one such conversation with an esteemed panel made up of very distinguished individuals, starting on my left with His Excellency Sheikh Saoud bin Abdulrahman AL-THANI, who is, of course, the Secretary General of the Qatar Olympics Committee. And then I'd also like to introduce to you Pascal Boniface, who is the founding director for the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs, based in France. And next to her is Burcu, ÇETINKAYA, who is a World Rally Championship driver. Let's give her a round of applause. She's quite a groundbreaker. And Deshun DEYSEL has the unique distinction of being the first black woman to ever climb Mount Everest to the very top. Give her a round of applause. She's a mountain climber from South Africa. And then someone that I shared a car with on the way from the airport and got involved in a very deep conversation with without knowing that is coming to sit on this panel is Arun, who is the CEO of Sporting Equals. He's based in the UK, in Birmingham. Give him a round of applause as well. And Piara, POWAR, who is the founder and CEO of Fair Network, which is based in the UK as well. And then I'd also like to introduce you to an African legend. He's a man of words. He knows how to play with the English language and use it to his convenience. His name is Tokyo SEXWALE. That's his nickname, Tokyo. That's how we know him. And one of the things that distinguishes Tokyo from the rest of the panel, and this is my starting point of this important conversation about racism in sport, is that Tokyo, you spent 15 years in prison in South Africa because you were black and because you refused to accept the domination of an apartheid government, a racist government. So I'd like you to set the tone here by helping me understand from your point of view what racism is.
I'll say it with a smile because yesterday I indicated that my 15 years was a discount compared to the big man who spent 27 years. Racism is a crime. It is a crime. It is a crime.
But what sort of crime is it though, Tokyo? When you say pedophilia is a crime, we know what it is. When you say robbery is a crime, you know what it is. So what is racism as a crime, the way you define it?
The United Nations, during our struggle against apartheid is a form of racism. The United Nations took a unanimous resolution, 2 resolutions, by the whole world that said that apartheid, racism is a crime against humanity. It is also a threat to world peace. That is the resolution of it's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against the dignity of men and women. It's a crime against society. It's an insult, it's brutalizing, it's dehumanizing. The fact that we came out of prison the way we are and we're able to smile does not hide the scars and the wounds that we carry inside as a people. So we are happy to be in this panel, Piara, everybody yourselves, to share these ideas. It is a crime, and at the summit in Johannesburg, which I indicated yesterday, we will be highlighting this point.
There is this risk, though, that racism is sometimes diluted because of the of political correctness. People are very quick to play the racist card and to say, he's being racist because he called me black. He's being racist because he called me Asian. I'd like you to sort of help me with that very briefly before I bring in the rest of the panel. As you can see, it's a full panel, and we don't have too much time. What act amounts to racism?
The dehumanizing of people on the basis of the color of their skin. The dehumanizing and insulting and denigration of people on the basis of what they look like, how your mother gave birth to you. It's not necessary to be like that in this world. I think I spoke sufficiently. It's important for me to allow space for people who are here. They were never in jail for 15 years. And I would like to hear more from them about what they think about this plight.
Let's give him a round of applause. Very modest decision to do that. And I'd like to make the decision to bring in His Excellency Sheikh Saoud, because, you know, hold him to account as an administrator of sport, but also acknowledge that he's been a very good host. But let's get into it. As a senior member of the Olympics Committee, what would you say is the state of racism in sport?
Well, I think if I can bring it in one way, if we can look and go back, back to the fundamental values of the Olympism, which is the three fundamental values based on excellence, friendship, and respect for others. And I think if we use this through education, which is the most important, and we, let it go from the educational part, then we are sure that, the racism, which is not in the sport, but also in the society at all, we will make sure that this will, in a time that goes, and it goes down to the level that we want, because we cannot ignore it. It's still there in the sport world. But I think if we, as either administrator or regulator, put a strict rules for the people who are behaving. If I say like an athlete in a team, and if he's been disqualified from that team, then this will be, something that will be a, model for the, lesson for the other to, to behave the way that they should behave. And also, as I said from the beginning of the educational, because if we bring it within the educational system, I think this will grow with the child and with the persons until he reach to the level if he going to compete or will be he a fan in the stadium.
I'm glad you say that, because Deshun, that is something that you agree with.
I absolutely do. I think, I'm from South Africa, so I'm going to use Nelson Mandela as an example, simply because he embodied so much of what we're discussing right now in terms of the concept, the philosophy of reconciliation. And I remember when he was president, it was such a new thing for our country. And an Afrikaner right-wing person called him an ape or a monkey. And so this journalist came up to him and said, so what do you think of this? What is your opinion? This person called you a monkey. And he said, that says more about that person than it says about me.
So even in the sport world, as we see it, as we know it now, when someone is being racist towards me as a black man from Uganda, it's really not about me.
It's not about you at all, and I think therein lies perhaps some of the key to how we can address the issue. If you think about a young child, they don't really know what the difference is between themselves and someone from another culture. It's as they get conscientized and conditioned into thinking a certain way. And so by the time an adult exposes themselves as a racist, I suppose, it's almost too late to change that value system. But I think sport has a unique opportunity to bring about a value system of equality, of participation, of helping people see the commonality that they have rather than the thing that makes them different. And if you see young children participate in sport, there is no better way than to see how you can inculcate positive value system and eradicate racism. So I think it should start
So when you
at
see
grassroots.
children from Qatar, from Uganda, from Ethiopia, from South Africa playing together,
Children, yes.
therein lies a solution. And Pascal, this is something that you agree with, that the weapon for racism in sport actually lies within the sport.
It's certainly the best weapon against racism. Of course, we could not deny there is some racism in sports, but less than in other parts of society. And why it's the best weapon to fight against racism? Because for our kids, his first approach from foreign personality will be a sportsman. And it could be a fan of someone else, whatever the color of his skin,
Like Kobe
whatever
Bryant
his
will
religious
have
belief
fans.
and citizenship.
Yeah, Kobe Bryant will have fans in Europe, in Iceland.
In all around the world. And so whatever you be, white, black, Asian, if you love this man, his sports, so it is a demolition of mental barrier.
And I'd like to bring in Burcu, who is one of my most fascinating panelists today. She's a rally driver. You might see her sitting there like that. But when she gets into that car, she becomes something else. And Burcu, you have had a very interesting experience. You've not always worn the hijab, is that right?
Yes.
Tell me your experience before the hijab and after the hijab.
First of all, I want to start with a surah, with a verse from the Quran, that we should be treating everybody equally And also that in Surah An-Nisa in 58, it says that we should give whatever somebody deserves to that person who deserves it. When we hand over a job to someone, we should give it to someone who deserves it. And I think it's also the same thing in sports, that when we hand a position to someone, we should give it to someone who deserves it. I tried to fight among men in my country in the World Championship, in the European Championship, along with the Middle East Championship as well. And before I was wearing the hijab, 5-6 years ago, I remember I went to one sponsorship meeting for the World Championship. Our budget was almost full, but I needed a small contribution. And it was very important for my career. And I will never forget the face gesture of the man who looked at my pictures. I had a picture where I was wearing a skirt like this. He said, we are a company that has a lot of Muslim values, and we don't want to have a person who wears a skirt, so we cannot sponsor you. And I was Muslim, but I didn't have the courage, or I was not ready for wearing the hijab. And alhamdulillah, I got the chance to wear the hijab. A few years later, then I had a few of my sponsors who left working with me because I decided to wear the hijab. So both ways, it's a contradiction. I am the same person when I look at who I am in the rally car. I was always a professional. I was always respecting my sponsors' values, but my personal decisions affected my position in some parts of my career. And I've seen it also being done to other people,
Right.
other examples. And whenever I can, I try to stop it, because I think a world without prejudices and a world without racism will be a much better place for all of us.
I'd like to bring in, first of all, thank you very much, but I'd like also to bring in Piara right now. Piara, I want you to merge all these things you've heard. There is the religious element. There is the social element in terms of racism as it existed in South Africa. Then there is this, can you actually legislate against racism as we know it? Or do you need to seek alternative methods of trying to find a solution to it? Because it's multifaceted, is it not?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I think that my domain is football. That's the environment in which I work in every day. And football is a global sport, and that global entity means that we have all races taking part in the sport, which often brings about a conflict with the realities that we have in this world now, conflicts of migration, of ethnic minorities. And I think you see that most visibly when someone like Yaya Toure goes to Moscow, is racially abused for doing his job. And so how do we deal with that? Well, I think that, of course, education has to be the long-term solution. There is no other solution other than education. But at the same time, we also need strong regulation.
That's a general word. What is education? What do you mean by that?
Well, education in the way that colleagues have already spoken. You bring people together. You tell people what is right and what is wrong. People need a direction and a lead. But in the end, regulation is very important. We need states to have strong laws. We need sports governing bodies, and in my case, football, FIFA and UEFA in particular, to enforce the laws that they have. And if there is somebody like Yaya Toure who is known globally, who is abused, then there needs to be some action taken against the abusers, whether it's at a club level, a national level, or an individual level.
Now, let me bring you in, Arun. You've been sitting quietly listening to all these great minds think. And His Excellency talked about federation, and you've just had Piara talk about federations as well. What more can federations do to make sure that this racism thing is stamped out of sport?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. I mean, from my point of view, I think the sports governing bodies, the federation themselves, have a huge responsibility in this. They're the regulators, etc. And if anyone's going to make a difference, they can do that. They can have the influence. And to do that, they need to think about diversifying sport. The issue we have, and I'm speaking from England at the moment, across sport, when you're looking at decision makers, because they're the ones going to make those final decisions, when you're looking at decision makers in England, out of 441 decision-making positions on the boards, 14 come from a black or ethnic minority background. 3% of coaches in England.
That's astonishing.
3% of coaches are black or ethnic minority out of a population of nearly 20%. 4% of referees are black or ethnic minority when the population is nearly 20%.
What's that got to do with anything?
Well, what that means is that when people are talking about issues on the playing field, the referees may not be empathizing with the issues of racism. So when the player is raising it on the field, a play, the referee's not taking it as seriously as he should be there and then. Yeah, same with coaches, you know,
But I'm not going to get my example from a referee. The referee is not going to teach me anything. The sportsman, the guy that's kicking the ball about, is the one that I'm going to look up to as a child, not the referee, not the administrators. And those are the guys that should be leading by example.
Well, you know, the governing bodies have a lot of power, a lot of influence on sports clubs, whether it's a Premier League football club or whether it's badminton, tennis, whatever. They have a lot of power. They have the influence that they can make, and they need to make changes. And if we were talking about what else we can do, education is important. But the problem I have is when we have campaigning issues, you know, there's so many great campaigning organisations, we need them because they raise the awareness of this issue. The problem is the issue starts to go underground, so it doesn't always mean we've lost racism now or it's reduced. It's actually gone covert, and now we don't actually know who's racist, who's not racist, and this is another issue. So in my view...
What do you mean? You need to identify them, give them badges and say this guy is racist, this one is not?
Well, what would you prefer to have? Somebody to come to your face and tell you that they are racist and tell you what they think of you, or somebody behind your back who stops you having the opportunities to play or to advance their career in administration? Look at the amount of black or ethnic minority sportsmen and women who, what do they do after sport? Where does their career go after that? And governing bodies hold a lot of those influential decisions to make.
Okay, Tokyo, you're nodding. I'd like to hear that thought that was going through your head.
I was agreeing with him in what he was saying.
Yeah, but you get a sense, though, that sometimes this racist card is too convenient and it's too close. Are there moments when people talk racism so much that it actually dilutes the people who suffer real racism, if you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, quite clearly. I think we should always be cautious and circumspect when it comes to the question of playing the red card. There are lots of people who want to use racism as an excuse for their own incompetence. This forum, this discussion here is quite a very important discussion, and it deals with a very powerful subject that needs to be treated very, very carefully. That people should be very cautious concerning using the red card simply because you want to gain an advantage. We should very much challenge that kind of a position. We will be dealing with that in the summit that I'm talking about, so that the question of racism is not denigrated because you're weakening the subject by standing out there and saying, this one did this because I'm black. It's a very, in South Africa, we used to have this kind of a thing. Such and such a thing happens because I'm black. So we've got to be very, very careful about that. That's why Nelson Mandela is famous for having made the following two statements. I fought against white domination. And then he also says, I also fought against black domination. So it cuts both ways. We've got to be very, very careful in what it is that we do. So I've got something here. You show the red card, both to the black racist and to the white racist.
If I can just add
That's a very interesting point. And Deshun, you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree with Tokyo. You know, the racist thing is very stark in South Africa because of our history. And, you know, people started to say things like there's now reverse racism because you've got black people doing it to white people. And it's ridiculous because what is reverse racism? Racism is racism. It's a prejudice. It's a bias against someone that's not like you. So just the terminology that we choose to use to make it something else can also nullify the real experiences that people have. There is no such thing as reverse racism.
And Morgan Freeman, well, philosopher, actor, I don't know what you want to call him, said that the end to racism will come when we stop talking about it.
I think the anti-racism will come when we start accepting ourselves as human beings and people of value who have something of value to add to the world. You know, it's out of our inadequacy and insecurity that we have these prejudices. So really, for me, you start with children because that's where you can inform values and shape them.
Pascal.
Yes, I don't want to be too pessimistic, and I need to fuel some optimism in this conversation. Due to the work of these people, there is less racism in sport than 20 years or 30 years ago. So the situation is improving. We have still to cope some difficulties.
What is the basis of you saying that? What's this research?
Because it's...
So let's work with the facts.
Because 20 years ago, Yaya Touré was not an affair, it was normal. No, it's a problem, and it's an exception. So I think that we are more concerned against racism than before, and so it's a progress. And as a Frenchman, I just would want to add something. When our team won the World Cup in '98, it was the black blanc-beurre, white, black, and Arabs nascent people. It was the combination of these people. And in France, sports is the best way to fight against the racists who are against migrants. And so it's very important to see that. It's when you look at Zidane or Platini, they went from abroad, and Copa in the former times. The three best football players in France were from Polish, Italian, and Algerian ascendants. And they were very popular even in all the country.
And Your Excellency, some of the best runners in Qatar come from Kenya and all those sorts of places. And I want to introduce this element to you. You know, this whole idea of bringing in people from different countries to work together in sport. How important is that in this attempt to combat racism?
Well, I think it's very important. I totally agree with Pascal and our colleagues that now it's reducing, and I can give you an example. For example, in Qatar, what we did during the Asian Games in 2006, we incorporated people from everywhere in the world. We have in our organizing committee more than 80 nationalities from all different backgrounds. And
how big is the organizing committee?
It was reached in the end of the game around 4,000 people.
Right.
So we had not only as people working, but also as a volunteer, which reached around 15,000 people as a volunteer. And the same thing happened in the London Games. So I think as one of our colleagues mentioned about the organization or the federations, also they play a major role because you can incorporate, you can include in all the events as organizer, everybody from different nationality, from different background, and I think this is a key, as I said, of bringing people together and whatever what is their background or nationalities.
Piara.
Yes, just to build on that and other contributions. In the end, I think we deal with racism through sharing power, because racism excludes on the basis of ethnic background, skin color, religion, and so on. And the way to counter that is to share power.
What does that mean?
That means, I think some of the points that Arun's made and other colleagues have made, is that if we have an underrepresented group, if we have a group that is discriminated against, then we give them equal footing. We allow them to share the running of the game. And I think often it's not about allowing them, it's about giving them due reward, rewarding their talents, regardless of who they are.
But increasingly sport is becoming much more about money than about getting people together. So let's not kid ourselves into thinking.
Yeah, but I'm not making a social argument. I'm not making an argument.
Yeah, but my point though is, isn't it also unrealistic to expect that people will do things out of the goodness of their heart if it doesn't make bottom line sense?
Quite the opposite, because the performance management, if you take a team of players like the Le Bleu that won the France World Cup in '98, the majority of them were immigrants at some stage to France. Now, what's the best way of enhancing their performance on the field of play? Some would argue is to make sure you have diversity in the coaching sphere, that you make sure that they have people there who can relate to their problems, who can relate to them as individuals, as professional footballers.
Okay, let me open up I'm sure there's some questions with the audience. If you'd like to put a question to the panel, please feel free to put up your hand about now. Do I see any hands up at all? Yeah, there's one over there. Please, if we can get a microphone to you as quickly as we can, that would be highly appreciated.
I saw the hand of Sheikh Saoud.
No, he was pointing to someone over there as well. Yes. Do you have a question or a comment at all?
Yeah, I do have a comment. Good afternoon, Ramel from Cambridge House in the UK. My point is on the race card and a few of the comments that you've made already. I think actually what I find slightly sad about some of the comments made really is that I feel like you're talking about the race card as if it's some sort of privilege, as if it's coming from, as if people are happy to have to hold the race card in the first place. So that was the first point I wanted to make. But the second was on the idea that racism is deeper than just what we see on the surface. So just because I haven't shouted at someone in the room doesn't mean there isn't racism in the room right now. And I think that was an important sort of point to make. And so my question really to the panel is, what do you think can be done about the racism that we can't quite see? Because, you know, I've been in a position where I've been shouted at because of my race, and I know it's really easy to call that out, because at the end of the day, it's quite obvious and it's quite clear that that was wrong.
All right.
But what can we do to stop racism that isn't quite on the surface, as in someone who's preventing me from, you know, getting an opportunity?
Okay.
What can we do about that sort of racism?
All right, thank you very much for making that point. I'm going to ask you, Tokyo, to respond to that. You're a politician, you're a businessman, you're a freedom fighter, and I want you to respond to the point he's making.
I take the point. It will be very difficult to fight something that has not been expressed. And I can share, we understand where people would be racist, but without showing it. And sometimes you may see it in the consequence of actions. But I must sadly say that it's very difficult to challenge it if you don't see it. What this forum is providing us with is the opportunity to discuss it insofar as we can call for more education. I agree with more education because you are dealing with an unknown. So the children, youth organizations, at schools, at varsities, this forum impacts on those things. It's more about education, it's about messaging, it's about advocacy. This is what we're doing, we're advocating here. It's also more about monitoring it and analyzing and prevention. But when all those things fail, there's got to be sanctions. There's got to be punitive measures, even to the extent of taking criminal action steps in order to redress
against individuals or against greater entities, because the risk is...
I said it's a crime.
Yeah.
I said it's a crime. Therefore, there will be instances, and we will be piloting that. Please go to the kiosk, you'll see the draft charter that we are providing. We'll be piloting the fact that you can't just have people apologizing and getting away with it. Let me give you an example of what happened yesterday. Black players walked off the field during training at a club in Russia called Rostov. The coach had called, was asked, do you have any black players in your team? You dealt with this story, I said, on the internet, Mr. Piara. The coach was asked, is Russian, have you got any black players in your team? And he said, yeah, I've got 6 of those things. It's on the internet right now. During training yesterday, 6 of the players walked out, led by a South African member of our national squad. Now, let's balance this thing. Racism is reducing in the world. That is true. But the racists are taking advantage of the playing field. They are getting fewer so that they think that the playing field, where there's television and all these things, makes it easy for them to go into. So the point I'm making is, I used to live, and this is my last point, I lived in Russia. At the time it was called the Soviet Union. As a freedom fighter, I trained there. We could walk the streets, it was free. Today, racism is rising in Russia, and we are going to be engaged in the Russian Football Federation. We're engaged in the Russian Olympics. Putin is a personal friend. We are seeing him because it is unsafe for me as a black person to walk in Moscow, because racism is rising in that society. It's rising in Spain. It's rising in Italy. But
why is it rising in all those places?
The races are getting fewer in the world, so they're taking advantage of activities such as sport to try to make their point because they think they will get more mileage. That's
Piara,
why we have got to be here to fight them out.
Piara, very briefly, you say sports is a big stage, big events usually offer big opportunities. Not too different from what Tokyo is saying.
Well, I think the Russia situation is very interesting right now because last week we had two very big events which show the dichotomy. On the one hand, we had a huge intergovernmental conference in Moscow which declared that clubs, Russian clubs, should be using their power, their appeal, to bring people together within the Russian state. And then on Friday, we had this quite renowned coach who says that I have enough of those black guys, I don't want to see Ebola in my team, I will sign no more. So that's the dichotomy that we're dealing with, I think.
And
the
then you also have a Russian
and
tennis
then the poison.
official who calls them, I don't know, and now this is the other argument, and I take both your points. But when this tennis guy calls Venus and Serena Williams the Williams brothers, is that a racist comment?
Well, you know, I've been following that very closely as well, and I think, you know, one has to be so careful because it could also be that another prejudice that exists in this person is sexism. So it could be both. It could be racist and sexist, but when I was reading it, I thought, you know, this sounds like a sexist comment, but unfortunately the way the media picked it up, maybe it's fortunate, I don't know, but they picked it up as if it was a racial slur, and I saw a man speaking about women as if they were men.
Yeah, and now, which brings me to you, Arun. Is there any chance that you can actually get rid of all these prejudices in sport? We've heard about the hijab prejudice, we've heard about the religious prejudice, we've heard about the sexist prejudice, we've heard about the race. Is prejudice not so inculcated in humans that the idea of trying to get rid of it is almost sort of a fantasy?
Prejudice is about prejudging people, and everybody prejudges people. When you meet somebody for the first time, it's what you do with that judgment that you've made. When you have the power to act on that as a recruiter of a job, if a black person comes to for a job and they're not given it on the back of the color of their skin, that then turns that prejudice into discrimination, racial discrimination. What can we do in sport? I think there's a responsibility for everybody. I think athletes need to be speaking out more. They need to be more ambassadors of this agenda, not just about racism. It's been mentioned about sexism as well. We also need the media to do more. We need them to report it, monitor it, and then question clubs more in detail about what equality work they've done. And then sponsors. There was an issue earlier mentioned about sponsors as well, and the business case. Because it's not all about moral, but just let me finish with this. But the sponsors need to be saying to clubs that they sponsor, have you done an equality review internally? Because half the problems are internal in the club, and they need to put a clause in the contract.
As a standard. Yeah. And very briefly, I'm just going to ask Burcu to come in a second, but staying with you though, is there a risk that this whole racism thing can sort of be too politicized? Then it then becomes political correctness, and then it becomes perfunctory action.
Speaking to me,
yeah,
sorry. Yeah,
very briefly.
We've got to be careful about that. That's why we've got to do it the proper way. We've got to have everybody understanding what we mean by this, and you can quite easily get people to say that, oh, it's just an issue. This is about black people having a chip on their shoulder. It's a good one they use in England. Yeah. But we need, going back to the original point, we need education. Okay. People need to understand what racism actually is.
Burcu, briefly, and then I'm going to come back to you, Pascal, to conclude, to just share a final thought. Very briefly, what do you want to say?
I also think it's very important to focus on the good things we have. Of course, it's important to fight racism and fight prejudices, but also it's more important, I think, to put our input and our strength into making what's good examples come stronger. Because when you have good examples, people get motivated. And the more you point out the bad examples, it's also a bit of marketing as well. People just remember racism.
That's interesting indeed. Pascal?
Yes, we need two legs for working. And so we need repression when it's necessary, but mostly education.
Okay. Your Excellency, 3 words to finalize, 2-3 words?
I think we use media also. Media is very important to promote the good example, the role model, and to show them once they do something against racism. And the other hand, we have to really also, attack the people who are doing any racist action on the sport.
Let's give a round of applause to my panel, ladies and gentlemen. It's been comprised of Sheikh Saoud and also Pascal Boniface. I'd also like to thank Burcu. ÇETINKAYA, World Rally Championship driver from Turkey, Deshun, who is from South Africa, Arun KANG from Sporting Equals, and Piara, who is founder and CEO of Fair Network, and finally, SEXWALE, who is the founder Global Watch South Africa. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. My name is KASUJJA, and thank you very much for being a part of this discussion.